HFY Vanguard in a galaxy full of empires, one species refuses to kneel. This is their story, beginning now. The transport shuttle shuddered violently as it cut through the upper atmosphere of Paraxis 4, the engine straining against turbulence that rattled every panel in the cramped cabin. Red dust storms swirled below, carried by relentless winds across a barren wasteland scarred by jagged mountains. The planet was no one's idea of a home. It wasn't meant to be. It was a crucible, an unforgiving rock, chosen by the Galactic Corporate Alliance precisely because survival here demanded strength cunning and relentless willpower. This was Hell's Forge, the most feared mercenary training facility in the galaxy, and for Jack Harker, it was both a last resort and a final chance at redemption. Jack sat rigid in his seat, his gloved hands gripping the edges until his knuckles whitened beneath the sleek gray armor encasing his muscular frame. Sweat trickled down the back of his neck, despite the shuttle's recycled air. The debt collectors who had hunted him across 3 star systems wouldn't dare follow him here. Not even the most ruthless bounty hunter risked tangling with the Forge's security forces. For the next 12 weeks, this planet would strip him to his core and either forge him into something unbreakable or bury him in red sand like countless others. A metallic chime rang out as the automated system announced final approach to Hell's Forge training compound. All recruits prepare for disembarkation. Jack's eyes swept across the shuttle cabin. He was the only human. Every other recruit was alien, scaled tentacled, or furred species are from across the corporate alliance, each bred in evolutionary crucibles far harsher than Earth's relative paradise. Their eyes avoided his. Some looked at him with open contempt, others with wariness. Jack knew the stories humans weren't welcome here. In fact, most alien species considered humanity a dangerous anomaly, primitive yet unpredictable, fragile yet resourceful. Still, none of that mattered. Jack wasn't here for pride or politics. He was here because he needed the pay. Graduates of Hell's Forge earned enough to clear his debts 10 times over with credits to spare for a fresh start somewhere on the outer rim. If he survived, the shuttle jolted as it touched down with a bone-rattling thud, hydraulic landing struts sinking into the scorched pad. The doors hissed open. A blast of hot air flooded the cabin, carrying with it the acrid tang of sulfur and scorched metal. The recruits unstrapped quickly, scrambling to grab their duffels and line up as they'd been drilled during the flight. Jack followed his boots, striking the platform with a dull clang as he stepped into the oppressive heat. Standing at attention on the landing pad was a tall, gaunt figure whose very presence demanded silence. His skin was gray and drawn tight over angular bones, his gaunt face dominated by 2 large crimson eyes that burned with cold intensity. When he spoke, his gravelly voice carried like crushed stone, echoing across the compound. "Welcome to Hell's Forge," he barked. "I am Sergeant Krell, and for the next 12 weeks, I own your miserable lives." The recruits snapped to rigid attention. Krell began pacing down the line, his gaze cutting into each of them like a blade. He stopped when he reached Jack. Those crimson eyes narrowed, and the corners of Krell's thin lips curled into something between a sneer and a predator's snarl. "Well, well, a human." His tone dripped with disdain. How quaint. The directors must be desperate, scraping the bottom of the evolutionary barrel. Jack forced his gaze forward, jaw clenched. He'd been insulted before, but the sergeant's presence made every word feel like a hammer striking his chest. Nothing to say, human Krell leaned in so close Jack could smell the stale heat of his breath. "Or are you too primitive to understand basic language?" Jack answered evenly, his voice steady. "I understand perfectly, Sergeant. Just waiting for orders." Krell's eyes thinned to slits. "Oh, you'll get orders. I'll personally make sure yours are twice as difficult as anyone else's. Humans don't belong in elite units. You're cannon fodder at best." He straightened, raising his voice so every recruit could hear. 2 minutes to stow your gear and report to the training yard. Anyone late will enjoy running laps until they collapse. Move." The group scattered toward the prefab barracks, a blocky structure that looked as though it had been dropped from orbit and left to rust where it landed. Inside, narrow bunks lined the walls, each with a glowing holographic nameplate hovering above it. Jack tossed his duffel beneath his assigned bunk and turned to leave only to nearly collide with another figure. Sorry, he muttered automatically before freezing. Golden eyes stared back at him, bright, piercing, and utterly unlike anything he had ever seen. They belonged to a humanoid woman with iridescent blue-green skin that shimmered faintly even in the dim light. Her long, silver-white hair was tied in a braid that fell to her waist, accentuating the graceful strength of her frame. "No harm done," she replied, her voice melodic but clipped with military precision. "You're the human." "Yes," Jack said, straightening instinctively. "I'm Lieutenant Nix," she introduced herself. "Assistant Training Officer." "Jack Harker, ma'am." A flicker of amusement softened her expression. "Not ma'am. Just Nix. In a word of advice, Harker Sergeant Krell has broken tougher recruits than you. Don't give him a reason to focus on you." Jack let out a dry laugh, too late. "Seems like my species is reason enough." Nix's golden eyes narrowed, her expression hardening. "Then give him a reason to respect you instead." With that, she brushed past him and strode out toward the yard. Jack exhaled slowly. Something about her words lingered. Respect wasn't given at Hell's Forge, it was earned and usually in blood. When he emerged into the blinding sunlight, Krell was already barking orders. The training yard stretched before them, a nightmare of climbing walls, electrified barriers, automated turrets, and flame jets that spewed bursts of fire at irregular intervals. It looked less like a training ground and more like an execution pit. Today, Krell announced, his crimson eyes locking on Jack. "We begin with a simple assessment of your combat readiness. The corporate battlefield demands more than brute strength or fancy technology. It requires," he paused, lips curling into a cruel smile, "adaptability." A chill rippled down Jack's spine despite the heat. Whatever was coming, he knew one thing: Hell's Forge was going to live up to its name. Krell's voice boomed, carrying across the compound. "Your objective is simple: reach the end of the course alive. There are 26 active defense systems designed to kill you. Some of you will fail, some of you will die. That is the point." Nervous glances rippled through the recruits. A squid-like alien beside Jack muttered, "This is insane. They can't expect us to." And to make things interesting, Krell interrupted, his voice gleeful. "I've selected one recruit for a special demonstration." His gaze snapped to Jack like a predator locking onto prey. Human, front and center. Jack felt every eye on him as he stepped forward. The other recruits shifted subtly away, relieved it wasn't them. "The human will demonstrate the course," Krell declared, "with one modification." He gestured, and a maintenance droid rolled forward its chassis, bristling with newly installed weapons and reinforced plating. "Combat scenario. This droid is programmed to terminate you before you reach the end. Its settings," he paused, savoring the moment, "maximum difficulty." Sergeant Nix interjected sharply. "That exceeds safety protocols for a first-day assessment." Krell turned to her, feigning surprise. "Does it? Perhaps for lesser species. But humans boast about their adaptability, don't they? Let's see it in action." Jack's gaze met Nix's briefly, professional as ever, but behind her expression he caught something else: concern. He rolled his shoulders, stepping into position. "Ready when you are, Sergeant." For the first time, Krell's smile faltered. Jack's lack of protest robbed him of satisfaction. "Begin on my mark," Krell growled. 3, 2, 1, mark. The klaxon blared. The droid's optics flared red as it locked onto Jack. The first turret swiveled and fired plasma bolts, scorching the sand where he had stood only seconds before. Jack dove into a rollhard, hammering. The course had begun, and already death snapped at his heels. Hell's Forge was living up to its reputation. Jack hit the ground in a controlled roll, his armor scraping sparks against the coarse metallic flooring. He didn't waste time. Plasma fire cut across the space where he'd been turning the air into a superheated blur. The combat droid advanced with cold mechanical precision, its servo motors whining as it brought a heavy pulse rifle to bear. The course stretched out before him like a vision of nightmare climbing walls, slick with oil flame vents, belching intermittent jets, and electrified barriers humming with deadly energy. He was already moving. Instinct screamed at him not to freeze, not to give the targeting systems time to triangulate. Sprinting low, Jack darted behind a barricade as more plasma bolts hammered into the ground, sizzling furrows into the hardened dust. The impact sent shockwaves through his ribs, reminding him of just how much power one direct hit could unleash. The recruits watching from the sidelines fell silent. Even Drex, the hulking four-armed alien who had sneered at Jack during the shuttle ride, had stopped smirking. Everyone's eyes were on the lone human dodging death at every step. The climbing wall loomed ahead. Jack gauged the distance, then broke into a sprint. The droid fired again. Bolts chewed into the ground just behind him, forcing him to throw himself against the wall. His gloved hands found the handhold's muscles burning as he hauled himself upward. Midway, a sudden jet of flame erupted from a hidden vent. Heat washed over him, blistering his exposed cheek where the helmet seal had shifted. Gritting his teeth, he twisted away, hugging the wall as the fire scorched past. A second later, he pulled himself over the top, gasping from the heat. The droid relentless circled to cut him off. Jack dropped to the far side, hit the ground, and rolled into a crouch. A hum buzzed to his right, the sharp crackling sound of electrified barriers activating. He froze, sweat beading on his brow. The barriers stretched across the course like a glowing web of energy, arcs of crackling current, lashing unpredictably. Behind him, the droid thundered closer, its heavy footsteps pounding the ground. For a heartbeat, Jack felt trapped. Plasma bolts lanced overhead, forcing him lower. His eyes flicked across the ground and caught something glinting, a dislodged metal pipe, its edges jagged and blackened by prior impacts. An idea sparked. He snatched it up, aimed, and hurled it at the barrier. Sparks exploded as the pipe ricocheted, flying back in a shower of molten fragments. It slammed into the droid's knee joint, staggering the machine. The disruption was small, but it was enough. Jack dropped low, sprinted forward, and slid across the sand, rolling beneath the droid's reach. As he passed, he grabbed its ankle and yanked with every ounce of strength. The droid toppled backward, crashing into the electrified barrier. The air filled with the scream of overloading circuits and the acrid stench of burning components. Sparks sprayed across the course, illuminating the stunned faces of the recruits. Jack didn't wait to admire his handiwork. He was already moving, weaving between turrets and flame vents. Plasma bolts tracked him, but he kept his path unpredictable, juking and changing direction just as the targeting systems locked in. A turret scored his shoulder. Pain flared white-hot as his armor scorched, but Jack kept running. He vaulted a low barricade, rolled, and pushed forward. Each obstacle blurred together in a haze of fire smoke and searing adrenaline. He leapt over one wall, ducked beneath swinging blades, and crawled through a tunnel lined with spikes that sparked when touched. Every breath tasted of ozone and ash. Finally, the last barrier loomed. He dove, body stretched flat, and slapped the glowing completion sensor at the far end. A shrill tone rang out across the training yard. Course complete. Time 4 minutes 17 seconds. Jack staggered upright, chest heaving. His armor was scorched blood trickling from a shallow cut across his forehead. His body screamed in protest, but he forced himself to stand tall. Silence fell. The recruits stared at him, their expressions shifting from skepticism to reluctant awe. Even Tess, the reptilian female with scales that glimmered in the sunlight, tilted her head with newfound respect. Nix's golden eyes widened slightly. For the first time, she allowed a flicker of a smile to touch her lips. Only Sergeant Krell remained inscrutable. His crimson eyes narrowed as he stalked forward. Jack braced for more ridicule, but instead Krell's voice rumbled low, almost grudging. Unconventional tactics, he said, circling Jack. Using the course against the droid rather than outgunning it. Not brute force, not technology. Adaptability. Jack straightened, seemed more efficient. The silence stretched tension, crackling like the electrified barrier. Finally, Krell turned to the recruits. His voice rose, carrying across the yard. The human completed the course using environmental awareness and tactical improvisation. He survived not by being stronger, but by thinking differently. Remember that lesson. It might keep you alive. Shock rippled through the recruits. For Krell, whose contempt for Jack had been obvious to acknowledge anything positive about him, was staggering. Jack felt a surge of adrenaline that had nothing to do with the course. For the first time, he'd turned Krell's scorn into something resembling respect. Not much, but a start. As the recruits were dismissed to prepare for their own runs, Nix approached quietly. She pressed a medical patch into his hand. "Impressive," she murmured. Her tone was calm, but her eyes betrayed curiosity and something else he couldn't quite name. Though I suspect you've just made Sergeant Krell's vendetta against you more personal. Jack wiped blood from his brow and applied the patch to his shoulder. Couldn't exactly let his droid turn me into target practice. No, she agreed, studying him with open interest. You couldn't. Their fingers brushed briefly as she passed the patch, a fleeting touch that carried more electricity than the barriers he'd just dodged. Rest while you can, Harker, she called over her shoulder, her braids swinging as she walked away. The day is just beginning. Jack watched her go, the corner of his mouth quirking into a faint smile despite his exhaustion. Maybe Hell's Forge wasn't just about survival. Maybe it was about proving again and again that humanity's place among the stars wasn't at the bottom of the barrel, but carved into the very top through sheer will and ingenuity. And this was only day one. 3 days into training, Jack's body was already a map of bruises and burns. Every muscle ached, every joint screamed in protest, yet his resolve hadn't cracked. If anything, the constant punishment sharpened him. The obstacle course, the combat drills, the sparring sessions, where Krell made sure to pit him against the largest and most hostile recruits, Jack endured it all. And still, Krell wasn't satisfied. On the third evening, as the twin suns of Paraxis IV sank below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and amber, the recruits were summoned once more to the yard. An alarm blared across the compound, its metallic echo reverberating off steel walls. Jack grabbed his armor and sprinted into formation, heart hammering with both dread and anticipation. Sergeant Krell stood before them, a looming shadow in the dying light. His crimson eyes gleamed with malice. Tonight's exercise is survival, he announced without preamble. You will be transported to the Caustic Flats. Your objective: navigate 15 kilometers north to the extraction zone. You will be issued standard survival packs. Nothing more. A ripple of unease passed through the recruits. Jack had overheard whispers about the Flats' corrosive gases, predatory fauna, unstable terrain. A place where even the strongest species thought twice about venturing. Lieutenant Nix stepped forward, her expression professional, but her voice calm, carrying an undercurrent of warning. The Caustic Flats are unpredictable. Toxic vapor pockets shifting ground, and native predators that stalk in the mist. Use your analyzers to detect immediate hazards, but don't rely on them completely. One by one, she distributed small devices. When she reached Jack, her fingers lingered as she pressed the analyzer into his palm. Her golden eyes met his. The human metabolism reacts differently to Paraxian toxins, she said softly. Be especially cautious. Jack arched an eyebrow. Concerned about me, Lieutenant. Her lips twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. Concerned about losing equipment. You've already destroyed one training droid. Before Jack could reply, Krell barked, transport leaves in 5 minutes. Anyone not aboard fails the course. The shuttle that carried them into the flats was stripped down, all function and no comfort. No seats, just handholds. The recruits swayed as the engines whined, carrying them out over the desolate expanse. Through the viewports, Jack glimpsed an alien landscape, phosphorescent fungi, glowing faintly in the darkness. Rock formations jutting from the mist like teeth and swirling vapors that shifted with an almost predatory intent. The shuttle landed with a hiss. The hatch opened, releasing a wave of acrid air that stung Jack's eyes. He activated his analyzer, watching as its display painted the mist with warning markers. Red zones for high toxicity, yellow for unstable ground. Pleasant place for a stroll, Jack muttered. Beside him, the squid-like alien recruit Mulo extended a nervous tentacle into the vapor. It recoiled instantly, skin blistering. The vapor contains corrosive compounds, he said, voice trembling. Prolonged exposure will erode our exoskeletons. Then stick to the high ground, Jack advised, pointing to a ridge running along the flats. Less mist up there. But Drex, the massive four-armed alien, snorted derisively. More exposure to predators. I'll take my chances with the mist. The recruits split. Most followed Drex into the vapor while Jack Mulo Tess, the reptilian female, and one insectoid recruit named Pax took the ridge. The climb was grueling, the terrain steep and slick, but it offered visibility the flats denied. Jack noticed Mulo struggling, his tentacles gripping the rocks awkwardly. Different gravity than you're used to, Jack asked, offering a hand. Mulo hesitated, pride battling practicality. At last he accepted. My species evolved in oceans. Dry land is challenging. They reached the ridge summit and paused to catch their breath. The analyzer beeped sharply, flashing red. A toxic gas pocket fumed directly ahead, invisible to the naked eye. Jack was about to suggest a detour when a sound split the night. A shriek, high-piercing, filled with malice. The recruits froze. Tessa's scales flared, her voice low and tight. Paraxian stalkers. Jack peered into the mist below. Shadows shifted. He caught glimpses of Drex's group scattering as massive shapes lunged from the fog. He counted too many legs, too many eyes reflecting in the phosphorescent glow. Panic erupted as plasma bolts flared in the darkness, wild and ineffective. They're under attack, Jack said, already moving down slope. Tess hissed. Those creatures hunt in packs. Their saliva dissolves flesh. The exercise parameters do not require us to assist. Mulo added cautiously, logically survival dictates we continue toward extraction. Jack stopped staring at them. That what you'd want if you were down there. Without waiting for an answer, he charged into the mist. After a brief hesitation, the others followed. The scene was chaos. 3 stalkers, arachnid horrors the size of wolves, encircled Drex and his group. One recruit lay writhing on the ground, armor sizzling as acidic secretions ate through it. Drex roared, swinging his massive arms, but the creatures moved with terrifying coordination, herding the recruits toward a toxic pocket. They're driving you into a kill zone, Jack shouted. Don't need human advice, Drex bellowed, blood streaming from a gash across 2 of his arms. A stalker lunged at the fallen recruit. Jack didn't hesitate. He tackled the beast mid-leap, the 2 of them crashing into the fungi-laden ground. The creature's exoskeleton was slick, its mandibles snapping inches from his face, dripping saliva that hissed when it hit the dirt. Jack locked his arms around its body muscles, straining. He rolled, planted his boots against its abdomen, and kicked with everything he had. The stalker flew backwards, smashing into a cluster of phosphorescent fungi. The impact released a burst of glowing spores. The creature shrieked, retreating violently, its many eyes burning under the cloud. The spores, Jack shouted. They repelled the stalkers. Tess whipped her tail, knocking more fungi into the air. Clouds of spores burst, forcing the creatures back. Mulo grabbed the injured recruit, hauling him upright with surprising strength. Jack smeared crushed fungi across his armor, the luminescent paste coating him in eerie light. Cover yourselves, he ordered. It masks our scent. Even Drex, prideful as ever, followed the directive. Within minutes, the group retreated to higher ground, the stalkers pacing below, but unwilling to breach the spore haze. As they caught their breath, Drex turned to Jack. His glare was gone, replaced by something closer to reluctant respect. How did you know? Earth has plants that release compounds to deter predators, Jack said, still panting. I took a chance. A chance that saved lives, Tess admitted. Jack shrugged. We all want to reach extraction. Might as well do it together. They continued along the ridge. Pax, the insectoid, was barely conscious, stabilized by medical patches. Jack took point analyzer in hand, scanning for threats. He felt a presence beside him, and when he glanced sideways, Nyx was there, stepping out of the shadows as though she'd materialized from the mist itself. Her blue-green skin glowed faintly in the moonlight, her golden eyes fixed on him. Impressive improvisation with the fungi, she said quietly. Most off-worlders wouldn't have made that connection. Just applying a little Earth wisdom, Jack replied. Sometimes the simplest solutions work best. Her gaze lingered. Sergeant Krell was monitoring from the command center. He expected the stalkers to thin the numbers. You disappointed him? Jack smirked. Glad to be of service. Nyx's lips curved into the faintest smile. On the contrary, I think you're becoming less of a disappointment by the hour. Before Jack could respond, she slipped back into the shadows, vanishing like mist. He was left with the distinct impression that he had just passed another test, one he hadn't even known he was taking. When the survivors finally reached the extraction zone, the shuttle was waiting. Exhausted, coated in glowing spores, they climbed aboard. The mood was different now. Eyes that had once looked at Jack with contempt now held something else, acknowledgement. By the time they returned to Hell's Forge, Drex even gave him a curt nod. Not friendship, not yet, but respect forged in fire and blood. Jack collapsed into his bunk that night, the scent of fungi still clinging to his armor, his muscles screaming from exhaustion. He stared at the ceiling, mind replaying the chaos. For the first time, he allowed himself to think that maybe, just maybe, he belonged here. But in Hell's Forge, belonging was only the first step. The morning after the survival run, the recruits assembled in the training yard once again. The atmosphere was heavier than usual. Almost 15% of their number had washed out in less than a week. Some had quit, some had been carried off on stretchers, and at least one hadn't made it back from the caustic flats at all. Jack stood in line with the others, his body still sore, his mind replaying the shrieks of the stalkers and the glowing haze of the spores. Around him, the mood had shifted. Drex no longer glared daggers at him. Tess, whose scales still bore faint scratches from claws, gave him a nod of acknowledgement. Even Mulo's tentacles twitched in what Jack was beginning to recognize as approval. Slowly, painfully, respect was being earned. Sergeant Krell paced before them, his crimson eyes cold as ever. He carried a long staff in one hand, striking it against the ground with each step. Corporate mercenaries often find themselves stripped of equipment, he barked. Your expensive rifles, your armor, your toys, they can be taken from you in a second. The difference between living and dying is improvisation. Jack felt his pulse quicken. Improvisation. That was his strength. Krell's lip curled in what might have been a smile. Today's exercise is simple. You will be locked in the resource chamber for 10 minutes. Inside are items you may find in any standard outpost or civilian depot. No weapons, no armor. Using only what you find, you will craft a lethal weapon. When time expires, you will demonstrate its effectiveness on a combat dummy. Begin. The heavy doors of the chamber slid open with a hiss. Inside, shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, stocked with mundane items, cleaning supplies, clothing maintenance tools, hygiene products, alien equivalents of household goods. The recruits surged inside, scattering like scavengers. Tess immediately seized long metal rods, clearly planning to fashion a spear. Mulo wrapped tentacles around cleaning chemicals, his eyes gleaming with the thought of mixing something toxic. Drex strode forward and ripped an entire metal shelf from the wall, bending it into a crude bludgeon with brute strength. Jack walked more deliberately. He let his gaze sweep across the room, not for the biggest object, but for something overlooked. Something simple. His eyes settled on a row of hygiene kits stacked neatly on a lower shelf. Inside, soap, cloths, razors, and yes, standard-issue toothbrushes. Jack picked one up, holding it between his fingers. Plastic, lightweight, but durable. A spark of memory flashed half-forgotten stories of prison inmates back on Earth turning toothbrushes into shivs. Simple, effective, human. He grabbed a metal file from the maintenance station and sat cross-legged on the floor. While chaos erupted around him, Jack began methodically scraping the handle of the toothbrush against the rough surface, shaping it into a point. The plastic curled away in thin shavings. Slowly, a crude but deadly shank took form. "What are you doing?" Human Drex demanded, pausing his mangling of the shelf to stare incredulously. "Making a shank," Jack replied calmly, not looking up. "A what?" "An improvised stabbing weapon." Jack tested the point against his thumb. Not sharp enough yet. He went back to work refining the tip. Drex snorted. "That pathetic thing will snap against combat armor." Jack's lips curved faintly. "It's not about brute force. It's about targeting vulnerabilities." Minutes ticked by. The recruits rushed to finish their creations. Jack wasn't satisfied with just a sharpened point. He wrapped the handle in torn strips of cloth for grip, then bent a piece of scrap metal into a crude finger guard. He used a heating element to harden the tip, then sharpened it again until it gleamed faintly. Primitive, yes, but elegant in its simplicity. Time, Krell barked. The doors slid open. The recruits filed out, weapons in hand. One by one, they presented their creations. Drex swung his bent shelf club with crushing force, denting the combat dummy's torso. Tess's spear pierced cleanly into a joint seam. Mulo's chemical concoction hissed and bubbled, corroding synthetic armor plating with acidic smoke. Then it was Jack's turn. He stepped forward, holding the toothbrush shank. The yard went silent. Krell's eyes narrowed dangerously. "What he said, voice low and sharp, is that supposed to be?" Jack held the weapon up. Improvised piercing tool, sir. Krell sneered. A toothbrush. You insult this exercise with a child's toy? He loomed closer, his crimson eyes burning. Are you mocking me, human? Or are all your species this pathetically primitive? The recruits shifted uncomfortably. Even Nix, usually composed, looked unsettled. Jack met Krell's gaze steadily. Permission to demonstrate, sir. Krell gestured mockingly toward the dummy. By all means, show us how you plan to kill with your dental implement. Jack approached the dummy, a humanoid form clad in standard armor. Instead of rushing, he circled slowly, speaking as he moved. In real combat, you don't have overwhelming force. You don't have perfect conditions. You have to exploit weaknesses. In one fluid motion, he drove the shank into the gap between the dummy's helmet and chest plate. The hardened plastic slid neatly into the vulnerable seam. Artery strike, Jack said calmly, withdrawing the shank. He stepped around to the side. Armpit junction nerve cluster. He stabbed again, clean and precise. Then he dropped low, driving the point behind the knee. Mobility loss. Finally, he thrust upward through the dummy's eye slit, vision compromised. Each strike landed with surgical precision. When he stepped back, the dummy was punctured at every critical joint. The yard was utterly silent. The advantage of a small weapon, Jack concluded, twirling the shank between his fingers, is that it goes where larger weapons can't. It's concealable, resource light, and disposable. Krell stalked forward, snatching the shank from Jack's hand. He studied it, turning it over, testing the point with his finger until a drop of dark alien blood welled up. His expression shifted, no longer contemptuous, but calculating. Primitive, he said at last, his voice softer. Then, after a long pause, yet effective, the mark of a species that clawed its way up from nothing. He handed the shank back. Sometimes simplicity is its own sophistication. It wasn't praise, not exactly, but it was the closest thing to respect Jack had heard from the sergeant yet. As the recruits dispersed, Nix approached him. Her golden eyes were sharper than usual, her voice quieter. Resourceful and dangerous, she said. An intriguing combination. Jack allowed himself a small smile, just practical. On Earth, we say the best weapon is the one you have when you need it. Her lips curved faintly, and what you need, she murmured, is often not what you expect. That night when Jack returned to his bunk, the toothbrush shank lay waiting for him, cleaned and polished. Beside it, a note in Krell's unmistakable handwriting. Keep it. You never know. Jack held the weapon in his hand, feeling its weight. Primitive, ridiculous. And yet, in this place, it was a symbol, a declaration. Hell's Forge would never look at him the same way again. The days after the toothbrush test blurred into an endless grind of drills, sparring, and brutal conditioning. Jack's muscles ached constantly, but his resolve only hardened. The recruits no longer avoided him. Some even asked for tips how to anticipate turret fire, how to read terrain, how to exploit weaknesses. It wasn't camaraderie yet, but the wall of alien prejudice was beginning to crack. Krell, of course, doubled down. Every exercise Jack faced was harder than the others. Obstacles rigged against him, sparring partners twice his size, rations mysteriously shorted. Yet each time Jack adapted, each time he found a way through. It was after one such grueling day that everything changed. Jack was cleaning his gear into the barracks when the alarm klaxons blared, different from the usual training summons. A shrill, urgent tone that made every recruit freeze. He grabbed his rifle and sprinted outside. The twin suns had dipped low, casting long shadows across the compound, but the skies above burned with fire. Dropships, at least 3 of them streaking in from orbit contrails glowing like comets. Recruits scrambled into formation as Krell appeared on the command platform, barking orders with his usual thunderous authority. Perimeter breach, 20 hostiles, corporate-grade weapons. Nexus dynamics. His crimson eyes swept the ranks. Defensive positions, oh. Jack felt his stomach clench. Nexus Dynamics rival corporation, infamous for sabotage and espionage. If they were attacking Hell's Forge itself, it wasn't for territory. They wanted something or someone. Nix appeared at his side, golden eyes sharp, voice calm despite the chaos. They're not here for the facility, she said, handing him a fresh power cell. They're here for you. Jack froze. Me, she nodded grimly. Your performance metrics have been flagged across every system. You've broken records we didn't think were possible. Nexus doesn't recruit. They acquire. You're the prize. Before Jack could respond, Krell's voice cut across the yard. Lieutenant Armory Distribution. Harker, Defensive Line 3. Jack sprinted to the barricades where Drex, Tess, and Mulo were already bracing for impact. Plasma fire rained down from the first wave of attackers, their sleek black armor marked with Nexus's interlocking circle insignia. They moved with military precision, advancing under portable shield generators. Contact front, Jack shouted, grabbing a pulse rifle from the rack. He sighted through the smoke, squeezed the trigger, and dropped the lead attacker. Tess's tail whipped, sending debris flying into another's path. Drex roared, hefting a mounted weapon like it weighed nothing, unleashing suppressive fire that tore through their shields. Still, the Nexus troops pressed forward, forcing the defenders back step by step. Jack ducked behind cover as plasma bolts sizzled overhead. His earpiece crackled. Nix's voice, "They're bypassing control centers, heading toward barracks." Jack frowned. "They're not targeting infrastructure, they're hunting me." "Confirm," Nix said. "Talon himself is leading them." The name meant nothing to Jack, but Krell's voice cut in low and grim. "Ven Talon, Acquisition Director for Nexus. If he's here personally, this is high priority." Jack risked a glance over the barricade. Through the chaos, he spotted a tall figure striding with confidence. Helmet removed, ridged face set in a predator's snarl. Talon, his gaze swept the compound until it locked on Jack. Jack ducked back. "He's coming." "Then we set a trap," Krell growled. "Fall back to barracks. Make it look like you're hiding." Minutes later, Jack crouched behind his bunk, lights dimmed, clutching the toothbrush shank. Primitive, absurd, yet somehow it steadied him. The sound of boots echoed closer. A smooth voice called through the silence. "Jack Harker, come out. Nexus Dynamics would like to discuss your future employment, alive preferably, but we have other options." Jack stayed silent, fingers tightening on the shank. "You can make this easy," Talon continued, "or we tranquilize you and take you anyway. Your choice." Jack tapped his comm once the signal. Talon stepped closer, last chance human. Jack moved. He lunged from behind the bunk, driving the sharpened toothbrush into the seam between Talon's helmet and chest plate. The alien staggered back, more shocked than wounded. At the same instant, lights blazed to full intensity and hidden doors burst open. Security teams flooded the barracks, weapons trained. "Drop your arms," Krell thundered, rifle leveled. The Nexus troops froze. Outnumbered, their advantage gone, they lowered weapons. Talon clutched his bleeding neck, staring at Jack with fury. "A toothbrush. You neutralized me with a toothbrush." Jack twirled the shank between his fingers. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. The attackers were rounded up, their weapons stripped. Talon was dragged away, spitting curses. Jack turned to Krell. For once, the sergeant's scowl had softened. "Unorthodox as always," Krell muttered, "but effective." Jack inclined his head. "Thank you, sir." But Krell's crimson eyes were troubled. They knew too much. "Someone fed them your records. We have a traitor." The words sank like lead in Jack's gut. "Inside Hell's Forge." Krell nodded grimly. "And when we find them, we'll see just how effective that shank of yours really is." The investigation was swift. Jack, Nix, and a handful of trusted recruits devised a plan. They would plant false intelligence rumors of a secret human combat enhancement method, something Nexus couldn't resist. Jack made a show of working on encrypted files in public, letting whispers of neural response training slip just loudly enough. Then he locked the data pad in his bunk with deliberately weak encryption. That night, hidden cameras caught the intruder commander Raske Krell's superior amphibian features twisted with greed as he pried open the locker. Predictable, Krell snarled, stepping from the shadows with rifle raised. "Decades of service, and you sell us for credit." Rask's throat sac pulsed. "The corporation doesn't value us anymore. They value innovation. Humans, I chose security for my future. Nexus pays well. You betrayed everything we stand for," Krell spat. Rask pulled a concealed blaster. The shot rang out. Jack felt himself shoved violently aside, Krell taking the bolt full in the chest. The sergeant crumpled gray skin pulling as blood seeped through his uniform. "No," Jack dropped beside him, hands pressing against the wound. Nyx shouted for medics, her golden eyes wide with panic. Krell coughed dark fluid bubbling at his lips. His voice was ragged. No time. Nexus will come again. In force. As if summoned, the perimeter alarms screamed. Security feeds showed assault shuttles descending, dozens of them. Chaos erupted. Krell grabbed Jack's wrist, forcing something into his palm, a small insignia, the mark of a Hell's Forge commander. His crimson eyes locked onto Jack's. You're in command now. Show them what humanity can do. Then his eyes dimmed. His hand fell limp. Jack's jaw clenched. Around him, recruits looked to him uncertain. Nyx's voice cut through orders, Commander. The title struck like thunder. Jack rose, the insignia heavy on his collar. The toothbrush shank still clutched in his fist. Evacuate non-combatants. Drex take Squad 2 south, cut off their flanking line. Test snipers on the ridge. Mulo rigged the corridor, smoke light traps. We turned this compound into a nightmare. No one hesitated. They moved, galvanized by the certainty in his voice. The Nexus assault hit like a tidal wave. 50 mercenaries stormed the compound, heavy weapons blazing. But everywhere they advanced, they met resistance. Hallways flooded with disorienting smoke. Barricades rigged with explosives. Recruits ambushing from vents and crawl spaces. Improvised weapons tricks and sheer human stubbornness turned every corridor into a trap. At the heart of it all, Jack fought like a man possessed. Plasma fire scorched his armor, but he pressed on, rifle in one hand, toothbrush shank in the other. He wasn't just surviving, he was leading, shaping the battlefield itself. When the Nexus general finally stormed the command center, flanked by his elite, Jack was waiting. Calm, steady, the data pad in his hand. You want human secrets, Jack said, his voice carrying. Here's one. We're really good at bluffing. He pressed a button. Panels slid open. Recruits poured out, weapons leveled, encircling the attackers. Outnumbered, outplayed, the Nexus forces surrendered. Jack lowered his weapon chest, heaving. Around him, the recruits looked at him not as an outsider, not as cannon fodder, but as their commander. Hell's Forge had a new leader. The battlefield of Hell's Forge smoldered in eerie silence. Fires burned in shattered corridors, plasma scoring marred the steel walls, and the acrid stench of melted alloy and charred flesh lingered in the air. The recruits, battered but alive, stood among the wreckage like survivors of a storm. Jack Harker moved through the command center, slowly, pulse rifle in one hand, toothbrush, shank in the other. His armor was scorched, one shoulder pad barely hanging on, but he walked with the authority of someone who had carried not only his own survival, but that of everyone around him. The data pad, once bait for Nexus dynamics, now lay in fragments on the floor. Empty, worthless, a ruse. But it had done its job. Krell's body had been carried to the medbay, but Jack knew the truth. The sergeant's last command had been his first as commander. The crimson-eyed drill master, who had once called him cannon fodder, had died, placing Hell's Forge in his hands. The thought weighed heavier than any armor. He found Nyx near the triage area, her golden eyes weary but steady as she directed medics. When she saw Jack, she straightened. The Nexus forces are secured. Prisoners are in containment. Losses. She hesitated. Minimal, considering the scale of their assault. Jack nodded. Because you held the line, all of you. He raised his voice, turning to address the recruits gathered nearby. Listen well. You fought like hell tonight. Not because of technology, not because of fancy weapons. You survived because you adapted. You improvised. That's what won this fight. The recruits' alien faces, gleaming with sweat and exhaustion, looked back at him with something more than respect. They looked at him with trust. Drex lumbered forward, his forearms crossed in what passed for solemnity. You led us like a veteran, he rumbled, not like a recruit. Tess flicked, her tail scales shimmering in the emergency lights. Krell chose well. Mulo's tentacles waved nervously, but his voice was certain. Without you, we would be consumed. Jack swallowed the knot in his throat. He hadn't asked for command. He hadn't asked to be anyone's savior. But Krell's insignia still weighed heavy on his collar, and he knew there was no turning back. The funeral of a soldier. The next day, Hell's Forge gathered to honor Sergeant Krell. The recruits stood in perfect formation, their weapons reversed in solemn salute. The crimson sun hung low, casting long shadows across the yard. Jack stood at the front toothbrush shank strapped to his belt beside Krell's insignia. Nyx stood beside him, her silver braid catching the wind. When the body was brought forth draped in the forge's banner, silence fell like a weight. Jack stepped forward. His voice carried not just to those present, but through every comm line in the compound. Sergeant Krell was many things. Harsh, relentless, merciless even. He called me primitive. He called me cannon fodder. But when it mattered, he put his life between mine and death. And in his last breath, he gave me what no one thought possible, his trust. He drew the toothbrush shank and held it high. He believed survival isn't about strength or tradition. It's about thinking differently, about using what you have, no matter how small, to overcome the impossible. That's what Hell's Forge will stand for. That's what humanity brings to this galaxy, and that is his legacy. The recruits slammed their weapons against their armor in unison, the sound echoing like thunder. For the first time since stepping off the shuttle, Jack felt not like an outsider, but like one of them. A new tradition. 3 months passed. The compound rebuilt itself stronger than ever. Nexus Dynamics licked its wounds, but rumor suggested they hadn't given up. Jack prepared Hell's Forge for that inevitability. He stood on the landing pad, Nyx at his side, as a new transport of recruits disembarked. They stepped into the glaring suns with the same mix of fear and determination he remembered so vividly. Commander Harker Nyx said, her tone formal, but her eyes warm. First human commander in corporate history, and the most successful training cycle this place has ever seen. Jack allowed himself a faint smile. Turns out a little ingenuity goes a long way. The recruits formed ranks, eyes flicking nervously between their alien peers and the human commander awaiting them. Jack stepped forward, insignia gleaming on his collar, toothbrush shank hanging ceremonially at his belt. "Welcome to Hell's Forge," he said, his voice steady, commanding. "I am Commander Harker. Your first lesson begins now." He held up the toothbrush shank. The recruits exchanged confused glances, some snickering. "This," Jack said, "is the deadliest weapon you'll ever hold. Not because of what it is, but because of what it represents. The galaxy doesn't reward brute force. It doesn't care how advanced your technology is. It rewards those who can adapt, improvise, and overcome." He tossed the shank into the air, caught it, and slid it back into his belt. "On your first day, each of you will craft one of these. Not because you'll need it on the battlefield, but because you'll need the mindset it takes to create it." Krell would have hated it, and he would have secretly loved it. Nyx's golden eyes softened at her lips curving. "New tradition," she murmured. Jack looked at the recruits, their faces a kaleidoscope of species and skepticism. "By the time you graduate, you'll understand why simplicity can outmatch sophistication and why humanity's greatest strength has always been finding extraordinary solutions in ordinary things." The recruits straightened, their initial confusion tempered by curiosity. Respect would come later, earned not given, just as it had for him. Behind them, the 3 sons of Paraxis 4 cast their overlapping light across the yard. Long shadows stretched toward the horizon, but in their midst stood something new. A human commander, an alien lieutenant, and a forge that would never be the same again. The quiet aftermath. That evening, Jack found himself back in his quarters. The toothbrush shank lay on the desk, gleaming faintly in the lamplight. It was absurd, really, a child's object turned into legend. But that was the point. Nyx entered quietly, setting down 2 cups of steaming liquid alien tea that smelled faintly of citrus and ozone. She handed one to him, her golden eyes catching the glow. "You changed this place," she said simply. Jack shook his head. "We changed it. Krell, you the recruits. I just showed them a different way." She studied him, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. "You showed them humanity, and it worked." They sat in companionable silence, sipping tea as the 3 moons rose outside. For the first time in years, Jack felt a sense of peace. It wouldn't last, word never stayed far, but for now, Hell's Forge was safe. For now, he was exactly where he needed to be. Epilogue. The shank at his side. Weeks later, rumors began to spread across the galaxy. Stories of a human commander who had turned a toothbrush into a weapon, who had led aliens to victory against impossible odds. Some laughed, some scoffed, but those who knew better listened. And somewhere in shadowed corporate halls, Nexus Dynamics plotted their revenge. Jack adjusted the shank at his side, now polished to a shine, its edge sharp enough to cut steel. Primitive. Ridiculous. Deadly. He was ready.